Good morning and welcome to Money and Mindset with the doctors, Dr. Money and Story Genius. Hey, Dr. TG, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm feeling pretty good. It's cold outside, but
It
somehow
is
or another, I'm feeling
cold.
a little warm over here.
Yeah, I'm actually a little warm because I just came from hiking and running. And so I'm a little warm. I'm even like, whoo, but I know that it's cold for real.
Like,
Yeah. It's like cold, but my body's hot. So
well,
yeah.
that's good. Keep that workout going. Yeah, I looked outside yesterday and I saw that wind and, the snow-capped mountains here in the desert. And I said, yeah, I think I'll
Oh
pass
yeah.
that.
Yep. And it's really beautiful. That's the thing is you kind of don't want to go out, but then it's once you get out there, it's so beautiful. I mean, yeah, it's really worth it. Once you get out there, it's worth it. It was worth it after I got out there, but I was kind of thinking, ooh, it's a little cold. I don't know if I should be doing this today.
It's amazing. Well, today we have such a great topic. We're talking about really preparing yourself with your thoughts and putting together a real plan of action, which I think is really great because one of the things we had a chance last week to talk with Tracy Weathers, our money coach, and give people some ideas about things they can do around their money. But today we're talking about how you can actually set a forecast. How do you plan to utilize the time? I often say that the capacity or inventory that you have available, and then making sure that a forecast is built upon what you believe you can accomplish. And then also making sure that at the end of the day that you've priced what you're offering properly. So those three things can work together to help you accomplish your outcomes.
And that's really important, Dr. Money, because a lot of times when we are looking at our businesses or looking at ourselves and looking at our worth, our mindset is not clear enough to let us know that we're worth more than what we think we are. And when we actually do forecasting and look at what it is we'd like to achieve, we actually can add better value to ourselves and start seeing ourselves in a different way. And when we see ourselves in a different way, we can actually expand our possibilities.
It's so true. It's interesting. The last week, I've been thankful that a number of people have been reaching out and wanting to have conversations about their businesses. And I'm so excited because I love to deal with business and deal with strategy and opportunity. And so I think sometimes people are surprised because one of the first requirements is that they go out and find an organization that reflects the company that they'd like to build. And it's amazing to me sometimes that people have never thought about what their so-called finished, established organizations should look like. And so when you go out, it's like so that you understand, people sometimes think that, oh, well, I'm going to drop some numbers because it sounds impressive. Yeah, I'm going to be $1 billion player. And it's like, but the entire industry is worth 10 billion. So how are you going to get one of the total? It's like, I want you to have a vision, but I want it to be baked in some type of reality as well so that we can make it manifest for you. And so it's just that, understanding and then saying, well, wait a second. Are you saying that so one of my contacts said, well, we're thinking about imagining having a publicly traded company. And I said, oh, okay. Well, you guys understand that you'll need a whole new team of leadership, right? Because there's a certain set of qualifications that come to bear when you're operating a publicly traded company versus when you're a mom and pop or, privately held company. You have a lot less scrutiny. Whereas when you're publicly traded, it's unforgiving. The markets can be so unforgiving based upon decisions. And when those decisions are released to the public, they certainly influence the stock value for your company. So yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, just like that awareness is not always there.
Yeah. So when we talk about forecasting, sometimes in order to forecast and to understand that awareness that you're talking about, we actually have to recast whatever it is we've done. So we have to go back a little bit and examine what were the choices we made with money? What did we do in the past? Kind of re-examine what your flow chart looked like before. If you didn't have a flow chart, you probably have to create one based on trying to go back and remember, what did I do, and writing it down. Writing down things is really important. And then we start talking about how to put that into a projection into the future, which is the forecasting that you're talking about. Share a little bit with us about what a forecasting exercise or chart might look like. How would someone forecast what's in the future for them if they haven't really done this before?
Absolutely. One of the easiest ways to do it is, a lot of times people can relate to the idea of this 40-hour work week. So we start with, if you say, okay, I'm a service provider, I'm going to provide consulting services, or I'm going to provide coaching services. So because I'm coming from a corporate background, then I presume that I should have a 40-hour work week. So I look and I say, okay, I have 8 to 5 Monday through Friday as my total inventory of my capacity. But when I start looking at the time that it takes to do work that might be administrative, billing, sales, the other responsibilities of my business, that's going to eat away some of those 40 hours. So I always tell people, if you want to work 40 hours a week, then that means that you probably only have 20 hours to 25 hours that are really billable available to you, because there's going to be other travel time and other things that you're allocating time to that you're not able to directly pass on to your client. You can't charge.
The first thing you're saying is really figure out the amount of time that you're having to do whatever it is to develop that product or to provide that service. What is the real time factor of that? Like, what's your real time going to be that you do the work? Okay, so know what your hours are first, and what your hours are. And we've all worked jobs where, we kind of have an 8-hour work day, but we really are working about 6 hours, or maybe we're working 20 hours in that work.
Exactly. Really putting it in. And so when you think about that, then that becomes sort of your universe of capacity. And you have two things that you can do. One, you can look at, are there ways to be more efficient in the other things that I must do so that I can gain more billable hours? But say, on a 40-hour work week, I have 25 hours that I can bill. Now you begin to think about, how then will I price the services that I offer within that timeline? And so that's based on looking at, either if you look at the competitive landscape and you want to benchmark, then you begin to identify, okay, what's sort of the category leader, who's the category leader in my space, and what seems to be their billable rate, what seems to be middle of the road, and what seems to be a company or a coach, for example, that looks a lot like me in terms of their size, their scale, their geographic footprint, right? So it's kind of understanding then in that context where you fit within the marketplace, and then what are your unique value proposition that will allow you to distinguish yourself in the marketplace, that may allow you to add a premium to the service, the solution that you're offering. And then from there, then you begin to say,
well, let's go back though. Let's stop there for a second. So we understand our capacity, first of all, and then we go with what that billable rate is. And you're talking about looking at a competitive landscape. And when we start talking about mindset, a lot of times we will talk about, let's not compare ourselves to others, because you'll always find people who are less than or greater than. But in the business world, it's important to have a competitive landscape so that you understand, what are people who are doing something similar to yours doing? What are they billing? How much time does it take them to do it? And when you do that, you actually can help to enhance or perfect your model. And then the other thing that I love that you just talked about was finding your unique value proposition. So if it's 100 hot dog stands out there, what makes yours stand out? Do you have the beefiest hot dog that everybody loves to get? Or do you have a special bread? Do you wrap it in a croissant roll? Or are you just the friendliest hot dog person in the world, and your hot dog is just a hot dog? So understanding your unique value proposition is understanding you and getting that mindset of understanding what it is you have to offer, and really, really stepping into that. So I love the three things we've already talked about: the capacity, the billable rate, figuring out what it is by looking at a competitive landscape, and then understanding your unique value where you can price it at a different point. So getting those things together for a mindset, I think just moves you into this next phase that you're going to talk about in the forecasting. So what follows those 3 points that people can grasp onto?
So then what I do from there is I start plugging in the actual hours. So say if I take a forecast and I say, okay, I have this 25 hours available in each week that I can potentially bill. And then I'll look at the first week of operations. You may not have as many of those hours allocated, right? So then you want to forecast, what is it going to take to get to a point where all of those hours are allocated to billable clients, right? And then somewhere within that point, if you get to maybe 20 hours a week that you have billable, you will discover that there's additional time that you require possibly to do, again, back end, administrative follow-up and things of that nature. And that's when you find yourself at that first fork in the road where you might need additional assistance. And some of that assistance might be unloading some of the administrative responsibilities, so that now you're looking at, okay, I can have a virtual assistant that I can have do some of these administrative functions so that I can add some additional billable hours back into my inventory. Or another thought you may have, well, what if I had some other coaches who are working under me, and now because they're coming in and they're not spending the same amount of time with administrative, say I can actually bill 30 hours a week of their time. And so now this is how I begin to expand the growth possibility for my business, is recognizing that I have these sales targets, but I also need to increase my capacity to support those targets. And then I need to make sure that my pricing strategy is making sense. So when I start adding additional people, I need to make sure that there is a profit baked into what I'm then billing that particular person's hours for, and the difference between what I'm actually paying them for those hours, and then making sure that the numbers add up for the business. So if we were talking about a product, it'd be the same thing. You would look at what are the fixed and the variable costs that are associated with producing the particular product. And so those specific fixed costs are the costs that are going to happen whether you sell one widget or no widget. But those direct costs are the costs that are specific to producing that product. And so it's important to make sure that in that product or service production that you've baked in profits. So for
the most part, you've taken us back on a cycle. You kind of go back through the cycle again. Once you have figured out your unique value and you've gotten what you think your price is and your capacity, you plug in the hours for the forecast, saying this is the capacity that I thought I had. You plug it in, and then you start to allocate, this is what's going to happen that you can build to the client. And it sounds like you go back through the cycle. How much capacity can I manage? And that's where you can add in either people working under you, people working beside you, people who maybe don't have the administrative portion and are doing the direct work, your production people, whatever those fixed and variable costs are. All of that leads to the forecasting. And all of this is important with mindset, because you have to have the mindset to sit down and do it, document it, think it out, reverse engineer it. You have to be able to discover those additional time gaps that you mentioned and figure out, okay, so how does this get billed back in to the client? And those are all important pivot points. Like you said, it's like a fork in the road. Once you've done the first iteration of figuring out how much capacity you have for the work, figuring your billable rate, finding your unique value proposition and putting that button on the price that you're charging, and then plugging in the hours of the forecast, you just go back through that again. You redo it. Like, you have to keep doing it in a cycle. So many of us get caught up, though, in, especially entrepreneurs or small businesses, we get caught up in billing directly, thinking that it's enough and not realizing those additional time gaps that you talked about, and those additional fixed, not the fixed costs, but maybe the variable costs that are in there that we don't always allocate in terms of our services. So, for example, if we are selling masks, and a lot of people are selling masks these days, we don't take in the time that it takes to go and look at the materials and figure out what type of material you're going to have and the design time and all of that. We totally just look at, I need to sell a $5 mask. But if we back in some of those other costs that it took to make the mask, not just the sewing and buying it from somebody, but the time that it took you to do the research, to understand. I just spoke with someone this morning who's doing some of the clear mask, and they're discovering cancerous materials in some of the plastics. So they have to go through and figure out which plastic should we use. And now they're doing all this research on plastics and what's the difference between this plastic and that plastic, and what's the different weights of them and who can breathe through them and all this. All of that that's research. That's R&D.
Yes.
We don't always count the hours for R&D, and we don't count the hours for R&D at the proper rate.
Sure.
So speak a little bit about if it's one person that's doing everything. And I said, well, my rate is $100 per hour, but an R&D person's rate might be $250 an hour. How do you forecast in a different way and hold that?
And so it's true. What you have to do is understand what are all the tasks that are required, right? And what is the typical market expense for those particular tasks, and to what degree you're going to require those tasks. So a great thing about research and development, when you make money, there's such a thing as R&D tax credit. So you can go back and get some of that money back that you paid in taxes by illustrating the amount of time that you use for just that, the research and development, or you created a new process that you were going to use to make your business more efficient. But when you're looking at what you're doing, it's so important to make sure that you keep track of all of the expenses. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll use a spreadsheet. I use a spreadsheet to keep track of when I'm working on each of the clients, things that I'm billing. I have a billable schedule that I'm tracking. So when I start working on a client file, I make note of the time that I started. When I complete working on that client file, I make note at the time that I completed working on that file at that time, so that I can keep accurate records on time allocated. And then throughout the organization, when we had a big advertising agency, we had every client had a computer code. So if we had to go and make copies for that particular client, our printer allowed us to put in the copier the code of the client. So we knew, okay, we made 20 copies for that client. And, we had to print X for that client. So by the time the end of the month came, we were able to aggregate all of the expenses that were specifically incurred for that particular client project. So we had a better illustration of what it costs to deliver our solution to the client. And so that level of understanding has been the same type of understanding that I bring into all of my organizations. Is I understand that everything that you contribute to the business has to have a cost center. And so we want to identify those cost centers. And so even when you set up your bookkeeping, you want to set up your cost centers so that you have categories of expenses. And when you're tracking those expenses, so yes, you ran out to go mail something. So you had postage expense. Oh, you had to drive there. You had some fuel expense. You had some materials that you had to buy an envelope, so keeping track of all of those expenses is going to allow you to get a better handle on what your real costs are.
That's fantastic. And when running a small business, and you're talking more intermediate and large businesses, when you're talking about a cost code in the machine and all that, and definitely I've worked in those situations where you put your cost codes in the machine. And I will tell you, as a business owner, you start to recognize. Now, when I worked for the big companies, I didn't recognize how important that was. But as a business owner, you start to recognize when people take your Post-it pads or when people put your code in the wrong way, because it's sort of like, excuse me, you're taking money from me. mean now? So that's something to think about for any of you out there who are actually working for someone. They have to do this too. They have cost codes, so they identify how they're spending their money in different ways. And when a company is losing money from small things like staplers or office supplies, then it goes to the bottom line, and that could affect your salary increase or anything like that. So all of these things tie in together. I love how they are seamlessly connected because you don't even understand them. You don't even see the seam. It's seamless. You don't even see how all these cost centers are connected with each other. For those who are doing their own business, tracking these things is important. So having tools like a QuickBooks, or even if you're using an Excel spreadsheet, you have to track where your money is going. It's the same that we're talking about for personal budgeting, where you're tracking what you're spending, where you're tracking what you're doing, where you're telling the story of the money. It's really about telling a story of what's happening in your business with your clients. What are you billing them? What are you billing them for? How are you doing it? And keeping that as a seamless story so that you can then connect the dots and understand your expenses and your revenue and why they match or why they don't match. And we want we want your revenue to be greater than your expenses. So when you're doing that, the steps for forecasting: figure out your capacity, know your billable rate, get your unique proposition, plug in those hours in the forecast, repeat, allocate the hours to your billable client. Once you repeat, discover those time gaps, and then understand what the tasks are required for the market's expenses. What degree are you working in it and all of that. And then just keeping track of it. Now, there's a couple of programs I'm sure that you can use to keep track of things. And Dr. Money, do you have any recommended programs for forecasting or for doing this type of work?
Well, I usually use two things. I use the QuickBooks because it gives me an opportunity to see the historic financials, what's been happening with the business accounts. And I can look at those categories. Or if I'm just beginning, a lot of times what I would do when I'm setting up a new company is I would grab a copy of, say, a Schedule C, for example, because I can see all the different allocations. I'll talk to my CPA on the front end and understand what are the categories of expenses that we'll want to have tracked at the end. For example, right now, a lot of organizations are spending money for protectional gear around COVID. So it would be great to have a line item, a category that you're calling out all of the expenses that you have accumulated for masks, for protective gear, for other items that you may have had to purchase specifically as it relates to COVID. Because at the end of your year, you want to be able to quickly know that, wow, we spent this much. And if there is an opportunity, say, for example, you got a PPP and you need to have it forgiven, it's really nice to have an organized line item that says, here were COVID related expenses. But more importantly, when you're forecasting, for example, say a month's of potential revenue and expenses, you want to understand at what point do you break even? And so typically, if you say, well, I have these, 4 weeks on average of billable capacity and each month period, how many clients or how many hours must I bill to break even and be able to cover both my fixed and variable expenses? And at what point do I begin to realize a profit? Now, historically, many companies that have capital and have been able to float have been able to kind of kick the can forward. So we've heard the term of Black Friday. Black Friday really meant for retailers the time that they finally moved to the black in their business in terms of their revenues, the time that their revenues finally caught up with the expenses throughout the year. And so when you think about it, Black Friday happens in November. So if you're operating on a calendar year, that means that they've been operating from January through November and operating in the red, meaning that their expenses exceeded their revenues. But finally, come this last Friday in November, they've taken in now the abundance of revenue that allows their books to finally set to where, oh my goodness, we have come into the black. We have made a profit. And so that when you think about it, from November, say the last Friday in November through December, that's 5 weeks. So imagine having to float a business. That's why it's so important to understand the type of business you're in, the capital required to operate that business, where you're going to get that capital, so that you understand the cost associated with that capital. A lot of times people don't even think about, yeah, there's a cost for capital. It's all cost. And so you want to track those things as well. So it's, and then you repeat the cycle again, because you want to look and see, are there any ways to create better operational efficiencies? Are there any ways to lower my cost and expenses? And so that's usually what I do when I work with a company or someone that says, okay, we need capital. First, I do an internal audit, because I can find oftentimes money that is misappropriated or processes that are redundant. And I can create efficiencies there. And then we have a better picture of what capital you really need, and then how to basically get that capital for the best possible price.
Now that's great for us in terms of summing this up, because when you talk about forecasting, we're really talking about looking into the future. And we started this year talking about vision boards and looking into the future of where we want to be and what we see. So if you are interested in being in a business, do your homework. Look into the future of that business by looking at how other businesses have done. What has it taken to run a donut shop? There's plenty of donut shop budgets out here that you can take a look at and see, what is it going to cost for the building? What is it going to cost for the dough? What is it going to cost for the employees? What is it going to cost for this? And then you can actually begin to forecast what it is you're going to need in the future to run this particular donut shop. And you can look at, what is your capacity? What do you have already to contribute to it? And then what are you going to need to gather to use other people's money to get into it? And then you also have to look at your own assets and liabilities. What do you have as leverage so that you can get that type of funding? Really, really important. Forecasting is about shifting your mindset into the future, looking at what is possible. The possibilities. It's possibility thinking, and it's absolutely writing things down and getting a good temperature gauge on where you're headed. And Dr. Money, I'm going to turn it over to you to close us out, because this was great. I just want to wrap it up with get your capacity, get your billable rate, know your unique value proposition, look at some competitors, look at that competitive landscape, and figure out what this money is going to be like. Forecasting, putting it in buckets.
Absolutely. I think you really finished it up pretty well. I mean, that's the idea, is making sure that you're planning, because if you plan, then you can create that possibility. It's a lot of times just the planning to fail, or lack of planning, is why you end up, failing to accomplish your goal, because you really haven't set a fixed goal. And that's common with sales. We think about, they're talking about the forecast. That's why there's sales managers having weekly sales meeting. Where are we as it relates to the forecast that we said we were going to hit? We're supposed to close 5 clients this week. We're only at 2. So let's hurry up and get the rest closed. But the one thing that I wanted to say before we leave today is, we've been putting our money aside in the jar. And I could not sit with just putting the money aside in the jar, because I'm like, well, that money has to earn me something.
Forecasting. How much is it going to earn me over here?
So I decided to start contributing mine to my Robinhood account. So as of today, the balance that I've contributed to my Robinhood is a total of $135 now. And so that means another $45 this week contributed. So that's where I'm at. So hopefully you guys are putting your money in, and your affirmations. I'm thanking the angels, the Almighty, and the ancestors.
Yes. I'm glad you said that. I may actually look at a Robinhood account. I tried it before, and for some reason it never went through. And I know they give you, don't they give you like $100 to sign up? That's why they give you stock.
Give you a share or something, and then there really is an incentive to get you signed up.
That's a good incentive to sign up. So that's a good way to do this, is actually move it into another account. Move your money, or actually put the money into the account directly when you're saving it. So put your affirmations in the jar so you can tell that you still have put, that many, and maybe you put that many affirmations in. I don't know. That's a lot of affirmations to put in.
That's why
I'm thinking the jar still has to fill up. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So you put an affirmation in per week, but maybe you write 2 or 3 more affirmations on the sheet. You can write more than one on one sheet. That would be a good way to do it. And then the other thing, we asked everybody to start your jar, to plan your calendar. Planning a calendar is about forecasting as well. You're looking at where you're headed. We talked about the calendar with vision boarding and casting out your vision. So now we're going to ask you to do another exercise. Start writing your money goals down. What do you want to achieve by the end of the year? Even if it's just what we did for the jar. If that's your savings for the end of the year, woohoo, great. You got a goal. And then look at 3 years, and then look at 5 years. Where do you want to be? And don't throw out random numbers. Think about the number. Think about the number of what would be good for you. A lot of times we'll just say, $1 million. I just want $1 million by the end of the year. Is that really what you want? Will that really take care of what you need taken care of? So think about it. When you're thinking of forecasting, forecast your own personal budget. What is it going to take for me to pay off my house? What would it take for me to pay my rent? What does it take for me to get this type of car? What does it take for me to eat healthy? What does it take for me to live my life the way I want to live it, to have a 2-week vacation? Forecast into your life those personal goals that you want. Put numbers next to them, because when you start to believe in the numbers that you're writing, when you start writing them down, you literally can manifest the things that it's going to take to bring that to you. So keep your mindset focused on these positive areas. We've got the affirmations. We've got you putting money in the Robinhood account. In terms of projects oriented, I just started using a system called Asana.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems to be working good for me. I'm delegating my projects through Asana. I used to use Trello, and it didn't work as good for me. So now I'm trying Asana, and it seems to be working a little better. That might be a way where you can start doing your projections. And hello, Greg. Good morning. He says, be specific. What is it that you want in your money? And that's exactly what we're talking about. Be specific. Write it down. Don't just say $1 million. Say what you want. Write down those things that it costs. If you're looking at a car and it costs $18,950, write down $18,950. And then write your tax down. You got to pay some tax on it, and the registration and all of that. Start forecasting into your future, and you're going to see a big shift in the way your life progresses.
Absolutely. And so with that, everyone, we thank you again for joining us today. We will see you again next Tuesday, same place, same time. Have an awesome week. And then until then, toodles.
Have a good one.